great one.
Well, I mean, that spoils the intro. Welcome to the EHC podcast. This is a little minors podcast that we're starting up at EHC. I'm Mike Hattery. I'm a frequent podcaster and the most irritating host. This is Danny Madden from Did the Tribe Win Last Night? Really honorary EHCer at this point. He covers the Akron Rubber Ducks for Did the Tribe Win Last Night? He's down there with relative frequency. So we're going to kind of just give you an overview on what the Rubber Ducks look like, people to pay attention to this season, and people not to pay attention to this season, which is equally important and often underobserved. So, been there a couple of times this year. Who really stood out? What's standing out to you in your sample size so far this season, Danny?
First off, thanks for having me. Glad to be here. I would say the guy that's jumped out the most so far, aside from the obvious two, being Bradley Zimmer and Clint Frazier, would be Eric Stamets, who we got in the David Murphy trade last year. He kind of stood out a lot in spring training, first of all, because he was in a lot of games. I mean, obviously Francisco Lindor is the shortstop for the foreseeable future. But Stamets found his way into a lot of major league games, and rightfully so, because he's really well known for his awesome glove. But what's been really apparent this season so far is that his bat has kind of woken up. He's got a couple home runs, which he had I think one last year, and he's hitting at an actual decent average for right now, and that's just been really impressive so far.
Yeah, I really like Stamets in that the Indians sort of went and got that plus tool and said, let's see what we can fix offensively. And, you can talk about this a little bit, but I think whenever you talk about Akron, the thing you have to really note when you're talking about position players is that it's like playing in it's like playing in the Grand Canyon. You're not going to hit a lot of balls out. It's a really tough park on offensive players in terms of home run production. So this sort of spindly shortstop putting up a little power early in the season is pretty encouraging, right?
Yeah, and like I said, he's a guy that's mostly a defensive first kind of player. He's not very far behind the defensive metrics of what Lindor would put up. But if he's going to be able to put up even a 270 batting average with maybe even 10 home run power, that's a pretty valuable tool that you could have. And he could probably, if they really wanted him to, they could probably bounce him around the diamond a little bit if they wanted to. And that would be a pretty valuable tool, or even a valuable asset to trade in the future, because the Indians already have pretty solid infield depth all throughout their minor league system. And along with Eric Gonzalez, if you've already got a Lindor up in Cleveland, you make him a better bat, and then he's just another trade chip to get something in the future.
I guess now we're going to talk a little bad really quickly. We have Rob Kaminsky, who's getting shellacked again tonight. We're not seeing any swing and miss. We're seeing a pretty bad walk rate. This is a guy who looked like a bargain when we got him for Brandon Moss. Mechanically, he looks different than most pitchers you've ever seen. The really interesting pronation of his release point and his left arm. Are you pretty concerned at this point about Rob Kaminsky's future?
I don't know. It's kind of hard to judge because he's coming off of that injury from last year, and he's never pitched higher than high A. So this is his first season in Double A, and that's kind of where pitchers tend to try to find what kind of pitcher they are, I guess you could say. A lot of pitchers have problems. I mean, even Cody Anderson had major problems when he was in Double A. So I'm not so quick to write him off yet. He is a lefty, and lefties are pretty valuable, even if they're just going to become bullpen guys, kind of like Shawn Moore or Mondo. But he is struggling very hard. I would probably give him until about mid-season until I would start to be really worried about him.
So just because everybody wants to tap in on this debate, we have to have this sort of quick Clint Frazier, Brad Zimmer, who's the number one prospect in the system conversation. So I really need from you a strong defense of Brad Zimmer right now, because there are some pretty significant warning signs. And what I'm looking for is the case for why I'm undervaluing Brad Zimmer.
I mean, I think we've talked about this off the air before, but I think the strikeout rate is very terrifying. He's striking out a lot, but the thing is that he's kind of a more, I guess, polished bat compared to Frazier, because he's already been through college and playing through there. I just believe that the tools that he brings are probably more complete than what Frazier's are at this point. Frazier's got obviously the tremendous power and he's got the speed, but he's also had he's had a lot of issues in the minors of being consistent. And right now he's tearing the cover off the ball, and even since mid of last year he's tearing the cover off the ball. But I want to see Frazier put up a full season of a consistent bat before I can really deem him as a better prospect than Zimmer. It's so close between the two. It's just that I think that Zimmer has more of the ability to be a five-tool player, whereas Frazier is probably more of just a power and a speed kind of guy. And if he can keep up the average, that's a whole other conversation. But like I said, I need to see a consistent season of Frazier before I really rank him above Zimmer.
I'm gonna counter. I have to. I'm really torn on these two. I guess we talk about polished bats, and I don't want to pick on you. I think this is just like a really good conversation to have overall. But talk about Zimmer like he's this highly polished bat, and like at both levels. Last year, when he's 2 years older, both levels he's 2 years older than Frazier, and at both levels he's striking out at last year about 3% higher, and this year at a significantly higher rate. We only have a 60 PA sample size. Now, does that give you some sort of Frazier is so much younger, and he's really showing the ability to make adjustments in terms of the swing and miss. Should we be worried in terms of Zimmer's bust rate at this point with his K rate? And what do you think he can do to trim that K rate? Do you think his swing looks a little long? And what do you think those sort of issues are? Is it pitch recognition?
I think a lot of it is probably pitch recognition. I don't think there's really anything wrong with his mechanics. Like with Frazier last year, I think that there was something wrong with his mechanics, and he's made adjustments. And then with Zimmer, I think it really is just him maybe getting comfortable at the plate. But I mean, I don't know, because his walk rate is higher this year than it was last year in Akron, at least. But granted, in Akron he was injured. It has dropped. His walk rate dropped between Akron and Lynchburg last year. But I really think that you're facing tougher bats in Akron than you were in Lynchburg, and I don't know, maybe because Frazier has a better eye at the plate than Zimmer, but I think that he just needs to work on recognizing when to not swing the ball, not swing the bat, because he's obviously striking out a lot and he's swinging at things that he should not be swinging at.
Do you also think it's an issue too of getting into frequently getting into deep counts? I mean, you mentioned Zimmer's walk rate, which has been good, in A+, and then a little bit this year. Do you think it's just sort of a product of him taking a lot of counts deep, and that in some ways racks up strikeouts as well?
I don't know. I think maybe he's just trying to do too much at the plate, like all the time. He's in a pretty potent lineup, but I think with some prospects, they know Lindor is a special case, but with a lot of prospects, like especially like your Bo Mills and your Jesus Aguilars, they're trying to become these people that are going to be the saviors of the future team, and maybe he's just trying to show everyone that he's going to be that guy, and he doesn't really need to be. He just needs to be himself and not try to do too much when he's at the plate, even at a Double-A level.
Well, I think Bo Mills and Jesus Aguilar are like a tremendous segue to first basemen who probably aren't going to make the cut as big league prospects. So we can talk about Nellie Rodriguez for a little while. What are your thoughts on Nellie? Is the power enough to carry him to the big leagues, or is it just not enough? Are we looking at sort of an Aguilar case where there's good power on the league average scale, but for a first baseman, there's not really enough power to carry his offensive profile?
Nellie Rodriguez's power is definitely real. It is a real thing. He is a very impressive person. That being said, everything else that he brings to the plate is pretty terrible. He doesn't he walked a lot in his previous levels, and then ever since he's been to Akron, his walk rate has dropped a significant amount, and his strikeout rate has rose a very significant amount. His defense is pretty bad. He doesn't hit for consistency very well. I mean, he hit 275 in Lynchburg last year, but there's something about being in high A that all these players just are freaking amazing, because Lynchburg everyone does really well. But Nelly, I don't know. I really like him. The tools that he brings are just not. I don't think that they're very well. They're not going to translate well into the majors. He's basically Aguilar 2.0. He's so much like Aguilar. It's ridiculous. He has more power than Aguilar, which would probably deem him a promotion at some point. But I don't think that it sticks. I think that there's a lot of holes in his swing that pitchers are gonna just tear apart, and he's gonna be a quad A first baseman, just like the Indians are really, really good at acquiring.
Yeah, I don't know. I bang on the K rate hammer a lot, and I do it because I don't think people pay enough attention to it. And Nellie Rodriguez is one of those dudes. So I think at the end of the year, he's going to have like 20 homers and a bunch of ribbies, and everybody who just kind of takes a cursory look at the minors is going to be like, oh, this is the next, sort of really solid first base prospect. And the truth is, he's got like a high 20s K rate right now, and your K rate really just rises as the levels go. The positive is he's kind of young for the level, but I mean, there's just so much risk with him. I honestly put the odds at like 4% that he's a productive major leaguer. And that's not, to be brutal on him, but the offense has to be so good to carry him.
I mean, he's got a career like 350 OBP. So I mean, he gets on base, which is good, but in Akron right now, his K rate is 35.8%. Granted, that's only in 12 games, but that's ridiculous. I mean, in Lynchburg last year, he had 26.5. And then when he got to Akron, it rose to 35.2. I mean, he's just, I don't know. If he had really good defense, then I could maybe see him sticking around for a little bit. But even his defense is horrendous, and I know he's working on it. I know it's one of the things that he really wants to get better at. It's just, I don't know. I just don't know. I think our next best first baseman is Bobby Bradley, who is a few years away from ever touching Cleveland.
Speaking of guys with huge K rate problems, Bobby Bradley, but we'll talk about a guy who doesn't have any plate discipline problems, but has sort of struggled to develop power. Akron press box favorite, loved by all, Yandy Diaz. So the big question with him, always for me, that I ask like every person who's seen him more than 5 times, is how do you grade his defense? And I always get a different answer, and I always get a different upside. So how do you grade his defense, Danny?
His defense is not as good as Gio Urshela. It's probably not even as good as Juan Uribe. I would still rate, because I think Juan Uribe has plus defense. So I would probably rate Diaz as a solid defender, and could probably be a pretty plus defender at third. He's got the arm strength for sure, and he has a really good first step. So there hasn't had a whole lot of issues at third, and I could see him getting even better there as time goes on.
So I think in this, we can talk about Bryson Miles, but he's a 4th outfielder, and we can talk about Todd Hankins, but he's nothing but a utility infielder at most. I don't think that's what the people are paying us the big money to talk about on this podcast. So we'll just dump that off to the side. But the conversation for me is we have a couple of sort of weird logjam situations with some of the players that we've talked about, and I'm interested in how they're going to work out. To me, it seems like Yandy Diaz at this point, he's going to be age 24 this season. He showed as much as he wanted him to show offensively last year in Akron. I mean, how long till he gets to Columbus? And does Ursula being in Columbus just build like a permanent wall on Yandy Diaz reaching AAA?
That's where I kind of get annoyed at the. I really like Juan Uribe. I like the Juan Uribe signing. I think that is really hurting Diaz's progression right now, though, because Uribe forced Gio to go down to Columbus, which then forced Diaz to go down to Akron. So unless Gio, I don't know what Gio is doing in Columbus. I haven't paid attention at all. But unless Gio really starts to struggle at third, and it sounds like the Indians really want Gio to figure it out at Columbus. I think they really want him to be the third baseman of the future, which makes me really worried for Yandy, because I think the tools that Yandy brings are much more valuable than what Gio brings, because Gio brings you a little bit of pop and a lot of defense, whereas Yandy brings you a little bit of pop, a little bit of defense, and a lot of on base. And I think that's way more valuable than having Gio Urshela on the team. So until the Indians either one decide that they want to move Yandy to a new position, I think that he's going to be kind of just stuck in Akron until Gio just kind of falls off into nothing or a new position.
Yeah, I agree too. I think the weird thing to me is I would think they would be able to figure it out in Columbus, where each of them could play at third 3 days a week and the other could DH when the person's playing third. I mean, really for Ursula at this point, the glove is always going to be really good. And I mean, everybody needs reps, but the glove is really good. So I think the biggest reason for him being in Columbus is, making adjustments offensively. And so that's not something that needs a ton of like six days a week starts at third base. I think it's sort of disappointing they haven't tried to balance that. And the other thing is, I think Diaz is someone who looks like a guy who's going to play third, maybe second and first as well on a big league team. I mean, he looks like someone who's versatile enough to play those positions and sort of bounce around, sort of like a poor man's Brock Holt, if he could play the outfield. The next question is, we've had this log jam in the outfield in Akron. We have Zimmer and Frazier, and then up until yesterday we had Chisenhall and Brantley spending significant time in Akron, sort of jamming up that outfield to the point where you have some older prospects in Lynchburg who are sort of raking but can't get the call up. At what point do we see Mike Poppy and Greg Allen sneak their way into that Rubber Ducks outfield?
It's a lot of it's going to be on one when the Indians decide that Bryson Miles and Jordan Smith, even though Jordan Smith's technically in Columbus right now, whenever they decide that they don't need as many plate appearances as someone like Poppy or Allen, and Allen's not a top prospect. Poppy certainly is, because Poppy has the power potential. Poppy struggled in most of his minor league career thus far, so I feel like Poppy could spend the entire season in Lynchburg. I doubt it, but it's possible. But once Frazier and or Zimmer get pushed up to Columbus, which could be mid-season, I think that Allen or Poppy will then follow that by going up to Akron. But until one of them goes up to Columbus, I don't think either of them go up to Akron.
Yeah, I think the door is sort of closed for them right now. Man, I'm harping on Zimmer a lot, but I think the start of this season, he's striking out 33% of the time. He struggled in Double-A with his K rate last year. I think the start of this season has really sort of taken the aggressive Zimmer to the big league route off the table, which means I think Zimmer could be there a really substantive amount of this season if he doesn't balance out his K rate. I mean, he could be there the whole year if he doesn't take some significant strides forward in the next couple of months, which I think some of us thought coming into the season we could see a really aggressive positioning by the Indians if he raked to start the year. But the door looks a little closed.
I'm more curious to see if they're going to be more aggressive now with Frazier, just because of the way that Frazier is swinging the bat at Akron. I don't think that they will be, but right now our right field is Lonnie Chisenhall and Marlon Byrd. Not saying that they are going to be so aggressive to move them up to Cleveland this year, but it depends on how desperate the Indians are getting, and depending on where they're at in like September, they might want to give their young right fielder a try up in the big leagues if they're trying to make a push for the playoffs. And if Chisenhall is continuing to struggle, I don't know. I doubt it. It's not very Indians-like, but it's a possibility.
Well, I mean, with Frazier right now, we're seeing somebody who is making power gains while significantly curtailing his K rate, which is like, if you can look for anything in Frazier's development, he is like checking every box right now in terms of the improvements he needs to make, which sort of, I think changes. Entering the season, we have people talking about 2-year timelines with Clint Frazier in Double-A. And whenever someone throws 2-year timelines out with, in terms of like how long Frazier's going to make it to the bigs, when people are throwing out 2-year timelines when guys have reached Double-A, that's just not the case. Double-A in many ways is finishing school for major league teams, and Triple-A is a holding pattern. I think we saw it with Lindor, where you get these sort of like 40, 50 game samples in AAA. But, one of the largest adjustments you'll see is from Lynchburg to Akron. You see huge improvements in terms of quality of pitching, quality of secondary stuff. And I think, Akron is a real proving ground for these guys. So let's talk a little bit. This rotation is not fun to watch, but we have one guy who is kind of fun to watch. We have Adam Plutko, who you can talk about for a minute. What are your thoughts on Plutko? Obvious, plus control command guy, not great arsenal, but, what are your thoughts?
I really like Plutko. I mean, he's got, like you say, he's got great control. That's kind of just his game, is a lot of control. He can pretty much throw the ball exactly where he wants. It's just a matter of not keeping it in the strike zone a little bit, too much. And that's probably part of the reason why he's getting shelved a little bit right now, is guys are starting to adjust to him. Last year, he came to Akron. He pretty much dominated every team that he faced. I mean, he had like a 2.3 ERA in 27 games. Now I think guys are kind of figuring out that, his stuff doesn't move a whole lot, and he can pretty much throw where he wants. And I think guys are starting to be able to read his pitches a little bit more and, kind of take off on him. So it's now it's a matter of him adjusting to the hitters and figuring out ways to miss bats again, kind of like he did last year.
Big league comp, Plutko is just a ton like Tomlin, right? Like we're just talking about another Tomlin.
Yeah, Plutko and Merritt are just Tomlin 2.0. I mean, that's who they are. They're both of them are very similar to Josh Tomlin.
So the last sort of guy we can talk about here that we can close out, Shawn Moore has been around forever. You mentioned Loogie earlier. This guy seems like a really clear transition to the bullpen guy, sort of one-out lefty specialist. When does that happen? Do you think that happens near the end of the season, next season? What's the timeline for him?
It's interesting because I didn't expect them to 40-man him this year like they did, because I think no one was going to take Shawn Moore off of our roster. He walks a lot of guys, but he strikes out a lot of guys. He has a really interesting windup, which is pretty deceptive, but he just can't work anything off of his fastball. He can't seem to locate a lot of his pitches. So it's really, I think the Indians are almost giving him like one last try to be a starter. And if he can't do it, then like probably I would even say closer to the middle of this season, they move him to the bullpen. Because right now, the Rubber Ducks don't really have anyone in their bullpen that's like really noteworthy aside from Ben Heller. So, and DJ Brown, he's been pitching really well. So, and the Indians don't have any lefties in Columbus, really. I mean, unless you're going to move TJ House to the bullpen, which is so silly. And I think that Moore Armando could be a guy that could come out of the bullpen like right now in the major leagues and be way more effective than Ross Detweiler. So, I think it's something that could happen pretty soon if he doesn't, really make any adjustments. Because like you said, he's been in Akron for a long time, and nothing has really changed with him. He's been pretty good, but he still walks a lot of guys, and that's his biggest issue. So if he's not going to make any adjustments, why not just put him in the bullpen where he's going to pitch for an inning, maybe 2, sometimes 3, maybe walk a couple guys, but get his strikeouts, then take him out of the game.
I always throw on an extra topic after I act like it's a last topic. So you threw Ben Heller out there. There's been a lot of Ben Heller talk recently. He's been pumping it up in the high 90s, perhaps touching 100. Secondary stuff hasn't been particularly awesome. Are we looking at an Austin Adams 2.0 or something better?
He's probably better than Austin Adams because Austin Adams literally just has a fastball, and that's it. Heller is a little bit more effective. I haven't actually been able to see him pitch yet. I've been pretty unlucky in that department, but from what I have read and what I've seen, he is really good at striking guys out because he has a really good fastball, and his secondary stuff he can at least work off of his fastball because it's a big velocity difference between the fastball and his off speed. So, it's just a matter of him finding a way to locate even just, because Cody Allen only has like 1 or 2 off speed pitches. If he could just tone it down, trying to just perfect even one off speed pitch, I think that he could be a really effective reliever in the near future.
All right, give me Danny's guy as we close this up. Who's the guy that you're really high on or much higher on than everybody else? In Akron, who's your boy? Who's your pet project?
I'm probably the highest. I would like to say Diaz, but everyone loves Diaz now, so I'm gonna jump off that train this season, and I'm gonna jump back on the Todd Hankins train. I really like Todd Hankins. I like the super utility abilities. He's got a lot of speed. Plays really good defense at most positions. His bat is just so streaky, and that's what's so worrisome about him is that he could be at times really good, and then he just drops in these cold spells, and it's just a matter of him more or less just he just gets too aggressive at the plate sometimes. I think that he could be a Mike Aviles 2.0. Basically, he could be Mike Aviles and play good defense. But that's neither here nor there. I really like Hankins. I think that he could help a club out at some point, but we'll see. I don't see how he fits into leveling up, going to another level anytime soon. So, but Wally likes him. Wally gives him a lot of plate appearances. I think that he could have the chance to, go up to Columbus sometime this season.
Well, thanks for coming on, Danny. You can follow Danny on Twitter by, searching his name. I'm not going to read the Twitter handle because you're smart people and you can use a search bar. But Danny Madden, feel free to follow him on Twitter. This is Mike Hattery. This is the Everybody Hates Cleveland Minor League podcast. We're going to have Danny around here a bunch because he's in Akron, and we love to take advantage of that. So thanks a lot. Have a good listen. Goodbye.